something that, and I'm looking at this from a Navy point of view, but one of the things that we're finding when we are starting to turn to ideas of having data sets that may involve Navy data, but other data, one of the things we think about, and it's just kind of one of these problems I think that might come up that I didn't see listed today, is that sometimes we're looking for the fact that collaboration or contribution by other people lends a sense of validity to our cause. Being the Navy, sometimes we're viewed suspiciously with our data being, even though we have competent scientists that take data, we try to have people that we contract with that take data, but we're viewed suspiciously. And sometimes by having a collaborative effort, and that includes data that wasn't taken by us and never was intended for our use originally, it gives a sense of validity to things. But I see a problem with that in the sense that other people would then see us as trying to buy our way into, or trying to collaborate our way into being seen as scientifically valid. And so would at that point people who are collaborators feel used or uncomfortable with being in a partnership with somebody that they may see is politically or scientifically a risk for them to be associated with in some way, shape, or form?
I was going to address, there have been parallels of that too, and the one that comes to mind for me with humpback whales is the Antarctic humpback photo ID catalog, which became controversial. That was a contributed collaborative effort, and one of the controversies there was whether anyone who contributed photographs could be a part of it and access the photographs, and the question became whether to allow the Japanese research whaling group to have access. And I think maybe a little bit of a parallel situation to the one you're raising there, where do you have some sort of concern or screen about who can participate other than a contributor? I think the whole research, the kind of Navy's involvement in research, where we just, in the behavioral response study, had an interesting post about someone sort of questioning the fact the Navy was funding this work, as I call it, into question. That has been such a hot topic at the Marine Mammal Conference in North Carolina, I believe it was, about 6 years ago. It ended up being one of the more heated debates, championed by people like Hal Whitehead, who raised the concern about the perceived conflict of interest of any research funded by the Navy, and the importance of research funded by the Navy that would be better if it went through an independent body that could somehow separate any kind of view of the Navy influencing the results on that. I think the Navy's, even though that hasn't happened yet, and I think it would be good if it happened, I think what's really good about what the Navy's doing now is the fact that they are very willing to share their data. And I think that's an important credibility step, and that they're not putting restrictions often. A bottom line for many other groups like us that have been concerned about impact of Navy activities, but also do work for the Navy, has been that there be no restrictions placed on data use, data publication, data ownership by the Navy, even if they fund it. And I think the willingness of the Navy that you're referring to share and enter into those collaborations and to not try to put restrictions on it does at least provide credibility, and to me removes some of the concern I would have about partnering with the Navy. So I think the Navy's made progress in what I've seen in doing that, but I think it's still a tricky subject, and I've seen it come up in other areas.
Yeah, that raised a few hands. It's an interesting question and a good one. Is this related to the same topic?
Yes.
Okay.
I understand those concerns, and those concerns sound really good. But then there's a bigger one that I don't know how you deal with. It's just what the Navy chooses to fund is an influencing factor.
And I think even under the models where there was an independent body filtering, that might control who does the work and how they do the work. But ultimately, I'm not sure a body like the Navy would ever let go of what it's going towards funding. They would obviously want it to answer questions they define. So, like you're right, how you phrase questions and what you look at, I think that's part of it.
more of a technological question because I'm more of a technologist. The collaboration in biology and marine biology is an obvious benefit, but I could see a tremendous amount of benefit in some collaboration on the technology that you folks are using, in particular Melissa and Jim, and worked with Ben Best for a while, a number of years ago, and he was very cooperative, and we had an initial bit of sort of technology exchange. And I know this is more about collaborating on the biological data, but I'd also like to just sort of keep on the back burner collaborating on the technology because it's often very expensive to produce, and it's being reproduced at great expense all over the place. Just more of a comment.
Okay. Do we have any other questions on this particular issue?
The sharing and the technology, or the Navy and
the issue of the Navy and collaboration data sharing with. We'll get back to you. Do you have a question on that?
No, it's actually right in line with the last question, technology.
Oh, last. Okay. Why don't you go ahead and.
Well, I've been listening, and there's a series of projects being described where people are sharing data and talking about the value of the collaboration in their data, and then we've got some people who have some tools and some technology. And I sort of was expecting that there would be an articulation of some limit to current sharing or some limit to the questions that could be addressed that could be helped by technology, but I'm not sure I've heard that. I'm just wondering if that could get articulated. In other words, do you really need to worry about what Jim Reggett said, or are you guys already solving all that problem for this particular issue, for your marine mammal issues? Or is there really something that can be identified as a need that needs to go get explored and solved with new technology for sharing and collaboration?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good point, and I think that priority X in the last 30 minutes of our discussion is one of those things that I'd like to put on the table as a real-world example about how we can integrate things that Jim was talking about and that Melissa was talking about and help people that are doing this type of work locally. So and is that kind of you're looking for something more tangible for us?
Well, more so is that if that Project X is the thing, a priority X is that thing, is the limit to moving down the road on that cultural thing among the biologists, or is that lack of access to technological tools, or what's the limit there in the problem?
No, I don't think the technological issue is a big issue. We are trying to overcome that issue. For instance, I can give you an example with the images. Images were slides, some were digital, came in all different quality, and so at the end, when we put our effort together, we decide to use one system to digitalize the image, use one system to work on all this photo catalog. So I think the technological issue can be easily resolved. There are problems with methodology also that we didn't have time to talk. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit later. Using different methodology, you obtain different results. I can say the animal feed more in the Santa Monica Bay because my definition of feeding is not the same definition of feeding down in San Diego. So that it's an issue that also needs to be looked at and try to use the same methodology. So when you compare data, you don't compare completely different things. But again, I don't see technology or methodology. I see them like things that can easily be resolved in comparison to other issues that scientists have.
Any other comment?
Well, I was just going to address Steve's question about where is there a technological need, and I think one where there is one is an automated matching program that is effective for a wider variety of species, and there are at least a half a dozen of these efforts that have been undertaken, typically with limited resources and typically somewhat successful for the particular species or data set they have. But I would say all of them are fairly limited and reflect the fact not a huge amount of effort is necessarily gone into that. But that would be one that I know we could really benefit from. Would be a way to do it, and it's unfortunately not that simple for something that can cut across species. Some things can do trailing edges pretty well and turn that into an algorithm. But anyway, just identify one shortcoming I see that would benefit from technology.
I've got one comment on that, and I agree with you. And it's from personal experience on helping to develop the FinScan program, which worked quite nicely for bottlenose dolphin trailing edges. It was funded by NSF for about 8 years. But where it fell apart was continuing support to update the software to be compatible with new operating systems, new interfaces. There was just no longer any money, and NSF got a nice product out of it, and it was useful for us for about 10 years. But as soon as we needed that long-term person to carry it on into the future is where it fell apart. So at least in some cases, funding has been a major issue to carry those things on and to be really good working tools for us. Before we move ahead, I just want to see whether we've closed out the Navy issue, and then I'd like to ask a question on that topic myself as well. Dennis, did you have something on the Navy?
It wasn't really the Navy issue. It was something John brought up. I'd never heard of the controversy over the catalog for the Antarctic, but you didn't say, was that ever resolved for the humpback whales?
I don't know what the current status is. I don't know, maybe Dave might. I just know at the time, and a couple of years into it, the collaboration that was at the heart of that was saying no and not allowing. I don't know. The only reason I was hesitant to give the outcome is I don't know if that changed at some point afterward.
Just one question for you. Is the Navy, or maybe Chip, is the Navy working towards an open science policy, or has one already been instated, or where is the Navy on that topic?
Yeah, well, actually, we'll probably both pitch in on this. The Navy's working towards an open stance on this. Right now, there's actually an effort underway to rethink how the Navy collects its data and manages its data. It goes along with the way that we monitor for impacts on marine mammals and sea turtles and things like that. So right now, there's a lot of opportunity there for interacting with the Navy to recommend things. So I would say it's not clear exactly what's going to come of it. And there are some things that present greater issues than others. Passive acoustic monitoring is a special area of concern for the Navy, whereas other things like observations through aerial platforms or something like that could possibly be something that we would actually put in OVC map. And I think Chip has just told me that that is currently being uploaded, I think, to that. Is that correct, Chip? Yeah, so we're actually starting to put some of that out already in something like OVIS, and then there's some other things that we're trying to figure out exactly how to share.
I think both of those points that you raised are really good things, and they're going to help to move towards the lack of suspicion about outside contributors donating data or sharing data. I think John hit that point on the head, so I think that's the right way to be moving, and I'm happy to hear it.
Try a little food for thought, I guess. I come from a background of working with a collaborative consortium, cooperative, if you will, in the timber industry. It's a very similar situation to what the Navy's dealing with, where timber industry has, forest products have rules they're supposed to abide by, and there's all kinds of contention over what those rules should look like. And so then, in order to harvest, the timber companies, landowners in general, not just timber companies, we're required to do some research to validate the rules and come up with better rules based on current data. Well, this cooperative started in the late 80s, got revised in about 2010. Some of the benefits and pitfalls of doing that is, the biggest pitfall is we end up taking like 5 years to get a study done. And that is not necessarily along, the studies that are like 5-10 studies. That's like one study. So that's the pitfall of it. And the good thing is it gets kind of everybody in talking about it, but you still have people with these biases that just everybody, people want one answer, somebody else, or need an answer. Not they want an answer. They need to answer this particular question, and you get another consortium that thinks you should just be doing general science and shouldn't be trying to answer particular questions. And so those are things to watch out for if you do that, but it can be done. And some really good things have come out of it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Jim and Melissa, I was wondering whether you might have comments on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. So I talked more about the technology at NCs, but there's definitely also a cultural aspect of it. And one of the things that I think that NCs, and there are other synthesis centers out there, but what they can provide is a platform that's neutral. And so even though there may be a number of different contributors to the project that have their own agendas, the project itself has some identity that's associated with NCs. And so that there's sort of that neutrality to that project, the things that come into the project, the data that come into that project. And we're not having meetings that are at one site or another. There's no question of who's hosting the data. It's hosted through this neutral party. And we've, I think, resolved in some cases in the past some interesting disputes between, even if it was within scientists, but groups of scientists that have long been disputing something. We've also had some cases of agencies and other non-academic groups who participated in projects specifically for that reason, because it does provide that sort of neutral ground to addressing these things.
Thank you. Melissa, do you have any wisdom?
Not on a quick note. What about the question of long-term funding? So how long is NCs foresee that they have funding now to keep their database going versus like SCMMW? I mean, that could be a concern too.
Yeah, so it's an interesting time to ask that question. Funding uncertainty in the future. As far as the databases, though, those are that data network I talked about is a collaboration among more institutions. So that everything that's in there will last beyond NCs. And there are even we've been largely NSF funded, and there are other NSF initiatives that I think would be in a position to take over something if NCs itself were to disappear in the future. So I don't think that's too much of an issue. And again, in our case, because the projects themselves are more or less ephemeral, the participants are bringing their own identity. The project ends, and as long as we do have some continuity with the data, I think we preserve the value of it.
Just whether long-term, if people want to continue to contribute to this database, then we need some kind of funding, I guess, to keep that general framework going.
Yeah, and I should also say that there's not this data repository is not something that exists somewhere and somebody else well, it is, but anybody could start their own node and participate in it. So the actual software behind the database itself is also open source. So if you were to come with resources to set up your own hardware and establish it, you'd be completely independent of our center.
How would I know if I wanted to go there or there?
I'd say it depends on the data. And there are also some other initiatives now that are attempting to bridge even at that level to provide uniform search and sort of infrastructure to bridge these different kinds of data.
And I would agree on the funding being definitely a big question, and I think SCMMW at this point has been around that enough funding agencies are suggesting, between NSF and NOP, that if they're going to fund a project and that data does need to be publicly accessible, they are saying in a database such as SCMMW. And so at this point, I think as long as they continue putting that in their proposals, they need to continue funding us to continue collecting that. And additionally, I think the Navy is also looking at picking that up as well. So it does look like OBIS will be going into the long term.
Good. Glad to hear it. I've got Todd and then Greg.
So my thought is kind of this, threading things between everybody, but since the lady last year from NC spoke, and she talked about the fact that you guys have the ability to bring a group of people together and sit down and kind of do this powwow thing. The majority of the people on the panel they have all their data sets, so they need time and they need a place to collaborate and agree on all their FIN and other items that they want to look at. And I don't know who else you guys have as far as your computer architecture people are involved. But whether it's grabbing the kid who designed Picasso and then gave it to Google, as far as matching those points, but there are people out there via photo recognition and other things that have already done this, and it's tons of free stuff that's out there. So there are people that have done that. So if it was a situation of it's a week, all these people they go to Santa Barbara for a week, you bring a couple of these other guys in to look at this stuff, and because these guys they know what they're looking for, but they don't know how to articulate it as far as on the computer. So you throw that person in. Because I would believe it would have to go through you guys as far as setting up the citizen public thing, because OBIS, you guys are more concerned as far as you have to have legitimacy of your data. So when we're looking at our lat longs, we want those things to be, so everybody on the panel could contribute their material to OBIS to set up that thing, so then the public could then go see, this is what it looks like, and then depending on whether NCs could host the public site, as far as the public could upload their data to find that comparison. Does that make sense?
Type video or photographic.
Right, because as far as taking what all the panelists have done, as far as everyone on the panel has their own personal set, or their researchers have done and gathered all this data. And if we were to include the citizens and go through this whole point of all these people are spotting and everyone's taken, whether it's Flickr or whatever they've been on, they've all taken their own photos and uploaded them. But if they wanted to participate with any of the researchers on the panel, the NCs could create that portal so that these people could have a place to go and upload their photos once the panel had agreed on a set of points, and whether they collaborate with the people on the East Coast doing their dolphin stuff as far as what they've got. So NCs could host it, and then all the panelists could upload their stuff to OBIS in one common set once they had agreed upon it, and then the general public could look at what was on there and get a better idea on how to. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense to me, and I think that's pretty much the path that we'd like to see things head with a number of projects, regional projects. Sean, you've got some comment?
I was just going to make one point, because, and maybe it's to rain on the parade a little bit, with large databases that try to kind of archive and store data. And most of the analysis and publication and interpretations still have to be conducted usually on a study-by-study basis. So I guess just I think these sites have key roles and they're really valuable for what they do, but we do have to also keep in mind that the primary ability to interpret and results of a study still, the burden still has to fall on the researchers collecting it. Because I just think about the interpretations someone would do with our sighting data, for example. As it appeared, we were an early participant in OBIS CMAP and put a number of our data on, and it was at the beginning when, for example, there wasn't effort data recorded or tracks, and how you could be led astray. But there are more subtle things than just that, or trying to compare, even if effort is there, trying to compare sighting rates from, two different studies that use different platforms and might have completely different sighting rates because of that platform. So it's important to just keep in mind that certain types of analyses, would want to tap multiple data sets. But I would still say the vast majority of the analysis interpretation still is needing to be done on a study-by-study basis. It doesn't.
I wasn't taken away from the PI.
And I wasn't even saying that so much in response to you. Because one thing I worry about is those of us who have been doing this a number of years, our biggest failing is that we failed to write up and analyze and publish more of what we do. And I always have a little bit of a fear if collecting data to put into a database becomes the end. That could be a real step backwards. And just not, these are important supplements, but they should never be viewed as replacing our need to analyze and write up our own data. And just to keep those occur on different scales.
Thank you. I've got Greg first, and then I'll come back to you.
Just really as a follow-up to I think what John was just saying, it seems that there's this trend by NSF maybe leading the trend with your group and your group, and also DataZoo and Scripps, who I'm currently working with on some CalCoffee data. There's this trend to create more open access in databases, and clearly there's a number of benefits, and both for science and conservation. I think a lot of those have been outlined by the panel today quite clearly. But again, I think there's some concern about access to that data in terms of complete public access, or is there some level of restricted access? And I think Melissa demonstrated this in terms of use agreement that pops up on the OBIS CMAP website as an example of trying to maintain some control over who's getting access to the data, at least making the researchers or the data collectors aware of the fact that this data is being used in one context or another.
it seems like the biggest concern, I think, that some people would have in terms of just having wide open public access databases would be either erroneous publications as a result of misinterpretation of the data that they've downloaded, or erroneous EIS reports, as I think Melissa and I were just talking about, where there might actually be guidelines about whatever activities, be it in the marine environment or terrestrial environment, that result from, again, possible misinterpretation of data that's made public. So I guess my question to Jim and Melissa specifically would be, in your development of these databases, how do you address these concerns? And do you have any examples of scenarios where that's actually gone through to the point where information is being used in management decision making or in scientific publications, and it's been misinterpreted from others, your sources or other similar sources?
I mean, I definitely agree that that is a big concern, and I think that one of the main concerns at this point that we're still trying to deal with from data providers to OBIS is trying to track who is using that data so that we can even track down some of those issues. At this point, there are not any publications that have come out from OBIS CMAP data, although it sounds like there's a few that are in the works, but we're not able to track what goes into the management, and currently we're not tracking users, which I know is something that they're working on very hard because that is a concern, and trying to make sure that that information can be assessed. I definitely agree that, as John was saying, it really can be an issue when people don't understand the way that the data was collected and try to merge these different data sets together.
Yeah, I'm not aware of there being any issues with the way something's been used. It's not safe, and it hasn't happened. I'm just not aware of it. I mentioned before, I think, when I spoke, that we do have some various controls for how data can be made accessible. So it's not that you need to make data available, publicly available. You can control access in some ways. And in fact, I don't think I clearly stated this, but it's really a metadata system. So you can provide metadata and data, but you can actually just provide the metadata. And there are many cases where groups have, say, their own maintained databases that are maybe publicly available, or they have their own mechanisms for how they make it available at some website somewhere. And the metadata record in our system fully describes everything about it, but just has a URL or even the contact information. So there's a way to sort of track. You could say that you use data from this, or you can even say, here, I have data, this is what it is, but you have to come talk to me in order to use it. Yeah. But as far as tracking use, I think probably we're just in a time when we're sort of advocating that people make data publicly available, that they make their analyses transparent and publicly available. Mm-hmm. And if that's what people downstream were doing, then when they publish something, you'd be able to see this. They used your data. This is how they analyzed it because these are their analytical routines. And so somebody could actually inspect that and make some statement about whether it was proper interpretation. It's just unfortunately now someone could take the data and publish something and not really clearly say how they did it. And it's sort of ambiguous whether they misinterpreted.
Yeah, just briefly with the famous Project X. One thing that we wrote down in this agreement that we had among scientists in California Coast was before we even think about open, more or less open database, was to produce this master thesis and then to do a collaborative paper. So I think the collaborative paper is for all of us a way to see our data published and then be more relaxed about posting everything online. So that's another way to go at least the project that we have.
I mean, I think similar to what Madalena was just saying, at this point, we do have the published data versus not published data, and so there's just these two levels where we can sit on data for up to 5 years or so, which is what we typically do for the fisheries centers, until they're able to get that data published, so they can provide it right away, but it doesn't necessarily get published right away and go public until they've had the time to do that. We are working, which I think Karen Baker has told me that she has, on having an additional level in there where collaborators additionally have access rather than just the data provider. Certain people who are collaborating on it can have access, so multiple groups do before it actually goes public, and having that additional level to increase collaboration that way and make it a better tool for that.
I was just going to offer up that there are actually numerous models that have learned lessons the hard way. We up at the Northwest Center Fisheries, when I worked there, I don't anymore, but we set up a collaborative website for sharing data on tracking acoustically tagged fish, and we had an unbelievable spectrum of levels of paranoia on, from open access hippies to I'm never going to share this, and we ended up having a variety of data sharing agreements that when you went there to get the data owner could say, you got to call me first, here it is for free, whatever. But the key thing was, once you actually downloaded the data from a website, there's a record of that, which made everybody's paranoia level drop down, because if something bad happened, there was a documentation of the changing of hands of data, and it made everybody a lot more comfortable and facilitate a lot more collaboration by having those agreements spelled out and having them be adaptive in that way.
Yeah, thank you for that. It actually reminds me, maybe I could call upon Phil to just give us a brief summary on how the protocol works for the genetic data bank at Southwest Fisheries, because you're pretty intimately involved. Requests for data, in this case.
Yeah. We do individual agreements with anybody who requests samples from us, and they're not very restrictive. I mean, what we do is people donate to our collection. We've got over 100,000 samples that have been donated by hundreds of collaborators, and every collaborator can specify how their samples can be used. Most often, we want these to be available to other people. We just want to be notified and told about any projects they're going to be used in, so that we can say, if we had to, we'd say, no, we don't want our samples to be used for that. We don't think it's good science or whatever. But most often it's just we want to be contacted, and then as soon as we've given permission, then the Southwest Fisheries will make those samples available to the requester. And the requester then has to sign a document that says they acknowledge that and they've gotten all of those permissions. Is that?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good.
So yeah, we have, and we keep that record. I mean, we have the records of every sample, who gives us all the samples and who gets all the samples. And hopefully we try to get information back on how those samples have been used, what papers come out of it. That's a little bit harder to track. But
it sounds complementary between the two systems in some respects.
I was just going to make one more point along these lines, and I really like the document that Southwest came up with recently related to authorship, because I do find in these large-scale collaborations, one of the continual tricky areas among scientists is negotiating authorship on publications. And I think to the public, they would kind of wonder what kind of picky-winny fourth author or maybe acknowledgments or whatever. Scientists aren't worrying about it, but by and large, it's what so many scientists compare and measure their success with. So it's the metric that they are forced to pay attention to. And while there are lots of guidelines out there, the guidelines are always sort of loose and subjective, what it takes to be a co-author. And it's something that proves in something like the SPLASH study, it's challenging who makes sense. There's a steering committee that has gotten its name on a lot of things, but then beyond that, how do you negotiate where, when you have that many contributors, what level of role they have in co-authorship. So I don't think it's something I'm proposing we discuss or resolve, because I think there has been some progress made on it, but just to point out that is a difficult area that among scientists is an important one that we spend a lot of time trying to worry about and get right.
Yeah, thanks, John. I agree with you.
Can I add to that? I worked in biotech for a while, and since everything there had to be legal, we worked out all of our agreements beforehand. And I found that working with collaborators in the more academic sense, it still makes a lot of sense. It feels uncomfortable initially to do that, but I found that everybody is so much happier and easier to work with if we've worked out exactly what the end products will be, and the default if this doesn't happen. If the science doesn't go the way we want, or a graduate student is supposed to do the work, doesn't do it, what happens in that case? So you kind of follow it through to all potential, and it does. The document that John referred to was that we tried to spell out what constitutes a reason for being an author versus being acknowledged. in different kinds of genetic studies. And not everybody agree with it, but that's what we put as our policy. And if you don't want to agree with it, then you don't collaborate with us.
Yeah, if I could just ask Bernardo and Elisa to comment on, it's related to authorship, to comment on the role or your perception of citizen scientists' contributions to projects, and whether there is some sentiment there amongst the citizen scientists and expectations, or whether that's an issue that we need to be thinking about as well.
For the Killer Whale project, with our Killer Whale catalog, what we do, we tell people, when people send me killer whale pictures, do you take killer whale shots? Please send them. And I get back to them, and then I DM to give them sighting history. In the catalog, we have charts that list who are the photographers, who sighted those whales on those particular days. And for every photograph that we use, there's photo credit right underneath it. So it's not just listed like at the back that, some people thank you for contributing, but they actually get the credit for that. That particularly in our case was extremely important because it's not like 4 or 5 scientists who were out there collecting all the pictures. It was 73 different contributors. And some people had only 1 picture and some had dozens of pictures. So I think that understanding is really important. I don't even like to get a picture unless I know who took it and when they took it, because then I carefully catalog it, so make sure I always have reference to it. And I always let people know if there's that opportunity to publish, and we'll contact them and let them know they have the best new picture of that animal. In a project like the Gray Whale Census Project, we've got so many people involved in that. It would just be, thank you for all the volunteers that's been with National Marine Fisheries, for all the different observers out in the field who have helped us over the years. If we've been doing this for 30 years, we have between 65 and 80 people who put in some time on that. It's really, it would take a book to be able to thank just those people specifically. So I don't think there's a lot of people who expect that. I do a little annual kind of summary and put that out there. It's on our ACSLA website, and I do thank everybody by name and how many hours they put in or how many days they put in, so they see that they have that acknowledgement. It's not just I did all the work, I do some of the work, but there's a lot more people who are retired who could put a lot more hours than me at this point. So I think that's important for that acknowledgement, and to continue giving them acknowledgement and support and let them know that their time and effort is of high value, and not take credit for other people's work. I think it's very, very important to know that we all build on the people who come before us, and we pass on our legacy hopefully to someone who will come after us. And that's a process that I think is extremely important.
Thank you for that. And Bernardo, do you have any comments?
I think that most of the citizen science contributions that I've outlined in my talk don't rise to the level of co-authorship, but and I don't think there's an expectation there. But I think that acknowledgement is important. I know people report banded birds, and they get an email back and say, oh yeah, this bird was banded 2 years ago. Here's what we know about it. I think that's really what the expectation is.
Okay, so it sounds to me like the expectation may be proper acknowledgement, and that we don't need to be worried so much about authorship, except maybe in exceptional cases, something of that nature. Dennis.
I had a question for Lisa. You go through this, you have this elaborate training program, and then is there any oversight on the new observers to find out how accurate their sightings are, and how do you handle that?
I get feedback from the anchor people, from the core people, on this person is there just basically to socialize. One person handles the data sheet. It's a veteran person who does that. We try to have some new people, we like you to also do that, not just look. But then I'll get feedback when I asked this just a few weeks ago when one person was ill, can this other person who sits with you for the last 2 years, can they handle the data sheet? No, they just kind of sit and visit. And one gentleman, I was actually there and I saw, he was there for an hour and he said, I didn't see any gray whale, because there was a gray whale when he came and he was busy visiting with someone else. And turned around and said, why don't I see any gray whale? So it's real important we get the feedback of who could be reliable, who's backup people. That's real crucial. Although we do have training In December this year, I only had one new person who contacted me. Usually I do a training like class of maybe 15 people. Quite a few of our people have been through the Whale Watch program, but this is specific. This is a specific program. They need to know what to do. They all get orientation packets. So that's a really good point. They do get the training, but there's some people who never have handled a data sheet. They don't know how to enter it. They get all excited and write it all out of order in the wrong place.
That's what I do all the time.
Yeah, there's killer whales. Write down what you have. Oh, killer whales, I'm looking at it's breaching. Write something down. No, I can't. It's breaching.
I think maybe what we should do here is take a break. And I know you've got, well, let me get to your last question because you haven't been raising your hand for a while. So why don't we go ahead?
It's just a question about where kind of all this is going. And this actually gets back to something that Jim said when he showed his slide and showed there was an arrow at the bottom that pointed to publication and said that that's very important. And we alluded to the fact that actually on some of these cases, there are other purposes to these collaborative efforts. And so for people that are scientists that measure their success by publications, that's important. But there are other cases where we have efforts that either do something like what Elisa or Bernardo were talking about, which tend to be a little more of a comparative or keeping track of something, or in other cases there are management decisions being made. And I think that's where sometimes we shrink away from what a collaborative, or at least we get to something and then we say, it's just not good enough. And an example would be the thing they talked about with the ship strikes. They want to make a map or the bite of the density and distribution of the marine mammals so that they know where the ships ought to go, right? Having done a similar exercise for the Navy recently, there are areas that were really bad on data. But eventually a decision's going to have to be made. And it's interesting to find out about some of these other things where these collaborative efforts can bring together more data and try to leverage these things. But at the same time, there will be a responsibility or a point at which these things are going to have to kind of say, we can make a decision on a bad data set, or we can make a decision on an incomplete data set and keep going. But I think in those cases, often it's very difficult. And we were emphasizing misinterpreting data, or maybe needing something like what Jim was talking about, needing it correctly analyzed. And I'm wondering if there's also ideas out there for maybe not only a place where you'll get raw data, but maybe data that's been treated the same way. It came in and somebody made sure it was analyzed the same way each time or something. So that maybe the raw data isn't necessary, but an analysis of the data that's consistent is necessary.
Yeah, that is certainly the model that the IWC uses in general, is they do quality control and then ask for independent assessment of the analyses to be done to ensure that everything kind of comes together in a way that they can actually put the bottom line on. I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
On that too. In late 1980s, we were contacted. There was interest in trying to decide about a ban of gill nets within a mile ashore, 2 miles ashore, 3 miles ashore. And they contacted us, and one of the things they were interested in was how many juveniles and cow-calf pairs do we see travel, what corridors do they use primarily? And we told them they really, really, really bias the near shore. And we basically went through the data and looked to see where we see them. The first year it was really close to shore, and that did enter into the idea of making it 3 miles out, because that would avoid a lot of our area, a lot of where those cow-calves are, juveniles, a little more susceptible whales. So that had input into it and looking at all that baseline data. So that's a good application. And for management considerations, if you have like killer whales in one area predating on, say, the fish, are they only in that area, or are they really using the whole Pacific coast and looking at management issues? That's really important.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for that. And I'd like to shift gears here now and talk about the 3 panel objectives that I outlined earlier this morning and start to get feedback on that. And I think here Bernardo is going to take some notes to record what we're saying and how we might be able to move some of these objectives into the future. The first one was an outline of regional priorities for research collaboration and data sharing. And I did add in there, as we did last year, some emphasis on groups that work on the same species and using photo identification catalogs as a catalog, as an example, but not exclusive to that. and then building collaborations between the U.S. and Mexico. So, in a nutshell, can we, as a group, come up with 1 or 2 or 3 regional priorities for research collaboration that we think are ripe for tackling?
I sure think the bottlenose dolphin studies would lend themselves to that, but it's going to be delayed by whether, I guess we could come up with a system that's sort of like the OPUS system that already exists, right?
Yeah, I think that our first step is to identify the priority, and then we'll figure out what the mechanism to make that work is. So there's a priority has been put on the table which matches with my own suggestion as well for us to further investigate and pursue whether we can form the infrastructure for a shared coastal bottlenose dolphin catalog database within our region.
Within that, that's what kind of data? So you're saying a catalog, but what about the...
Well,
you say a database, but that can include all kinds of things. So there are particular types of information, of data you're talking about.
Yeah, and I don't want to go that far into it yet. I just want to agree on some priorities as the first step, 1 or 2 or 3 priorities that we can agree on as a group and put into our summary for tomorrow. What do you guys think? Is there any other feedback on the suggestion of a bottlenose dolphin collaborative project for Southern California?
I'm supportive of the idea, and as one of the many people in the room who's been involved in collecting some of that data, I think it would be beneficial to pursue it further. So.
Are there any objections to that as listing as a priority?
I'm not quite sure I'm understanding priority. Maybe maybe you can explain what you mean by that.
A priority is we want to list 3 projects that we think that we want to facilitate or try and further develop as the outcome of this panel discussion. To identify 3. So maybe priority is not the right word, but three projects or 2 projects.
Like species, or just any open...
Species are easier to begin with, but it doesn't have to be limited to species. Sean?
I'm sorry, this isn't speaking with the bottlenose dolphin thing, though. Do you want me to hold it for a minute? Or?
Yeah, if we can stick on identifying research projects or priorities that we think we might be able to make some progress on between now and next year.
Okay, I've got an idea on that. It's just I'm not talking at the bottlenose.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, are we closed on bottlenose dolphins?
Would that also be, in our case, like if we saw them almost every single day, would that be recording the occurrence of bottlenose, not necessarily the identification of individuals, or just photo ID?
Melissa, you help me here. It's the idea would be open to anybody that wants to contribute, and the access would be open as well. But maybe you can help us here with articulating on something like that. Michael, the development of something like that.
So I think I'm struggling a little here as well on where you're trying to go with key priority projects.
What we're trying to do as a group is identify several projects that we think are ripe for collaboration and development of an infrastructure that would allow open science to take place.
I mean, certainly on the OBIS side, I think some of the work that's being done right now with the photo ID database is something that might be extendable to other groups. So I don't know if that answers whether we're including the current sort of data or where you're trying to go with that collaboration. But I know there are at least certain tools that can work to combine some of those data sets. But as far as actually choosing what it is that researchers are interested in, I think is another question.
Okay, and I don't think we even need, we don't even need to go that far right now. I don't think in identifying what parameters, but the general concept to begin with.
Just a quick question, maybe, having had some experience with similar projects. It's still not clear to the listener, me in this case, that the thing being asked about is, when you say project, is that referring to the nature of the data sharing, the data structure issue, or the conceptual question commonalities? In other words, if it's the photo ID catalog for bottlenose dolphins, is it because you're interested in abundance or distribution or population genetic structure, which it's not likely to really help out that much with, and given those things, or is it how you want to relate occurrence with climatic conditions, which might make different demands on how you would structure it or you talk to the plays. And I think everybody can kind of sit there and conceptualize, okay, for many of these questions, we know something about the distribution and density of critters, and so in some way the photo catalog would be useful. But exactly how and who plays and how the data is structured and how that is shared in a way that generates that collaboration may be very different if the conceptual question is different. So to what extent is the priority you're looking for the object, the library of images, and to what extent is it the conceptual ecology questions or management questions?
Well, I think I answered first to Lisa's question. She was asking if her data would be useful. And I'm not sure. If we want to start, for instance, to use the data that we put together with Project X, I think having, for instance, basic things like latitude and longitude, where you saw these animals, to identify what these animals have, history of the sighting for every single animal that you observe, I think it could be a starting point. You were talking with the SCMMW, the first steps was to have the GPS position of these animals. So land-based survey, I'm not sure how, maybe something that can be added in the future, like a conservation educational component that the database, when it's developed, you add all different type of data can develop in something different. I think starting with basic stuff and then adding more information, like if you start with what we have now, there are, again, history citing all these animals, that we can add behavioral information for this sighting that we have, so that's something else that we can add. We can, one step at a time, move ahead and then see where we can go from there. I don't know if I kind of answer your question.
My thought with that also is because if we're getting the last couple of years a huge increase in the number of sightings, like 145 days out of 166 days, that's saying that this is an area of heavy usage, and that would be a great place to target doing boat-based surveys up and down the coast there, since they're using that area, giving birth in this area. Usage is increasing over time, and it's at almost every single day. So rather than, it's just sort of a little flag, this is an area that should be explored for anybody in a boat to get those pictures.
Greg, I'm going to come to you. John, maybe this might be a good time for us to show us the splash link.
Well, I was going to take a swing at the bottlenose dolphin.
Oh, you were?
I was going to try to back us away from that.
Okay. We can back away from it if you want.
I don't mind backing away from it or engaging in it.
I mean, I was sort of trying to see if I had captured what you were after.
Yeah, that's fine. Why don't you go ahead with that?
I mean, I do think from the talks we've heard today, we've seen bottlenose dolphins. They're close to shore, so they're easily sighted. There are a number of researchers already conducting research on them. They're not a very large population. They're using an urbanized area with threats. It does seem to me that it's a project that would lend itself to the sort of collaboration we've been talking about today, in the sense that the number of both citizens and researchers involved in it. The only part I don't know is, focusing it on an objective seems important, and also I don't know the current limitations of the collaboration that's already occurring. But I think if you were after an endorsement of, yes, this makes a good species to share data on and set up a more formal, larger scale, long-term arrangement to collaborate and involve citizens, it does seem like a good candidate.
Yeah, thank you.
But some things need defining about.
That's well said, and I think that really is where, at least in my mind, I was hoping we would head. Greg.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think
two Greg. There's two Greg.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Which Greg are you?
I'm not sure which one of you.
Go ahead, Greg. Please.
I was just going to say, I think, maybe an objective that might be valuable instead of project specific is, since it's the Southern California workshop, is a database of who's doing what. and what research goals people have and what species they're interested in, because how do I know who's doing fin whale genetics or something like that? It's hard to collaborate and create collaborations if I don't know that Greg's offshore doing Terciops work off Catalina and San Clemente. So I would say stepping back, kind of what I think the goal of this whole meeting of getting everybody together to talk about collaborating is, what are your interests, what are your goals, what are your current projects, and then you can, once you have that database, you can go to it and say, oh, well, I need to contact this person to talk to them about the larger scale of things.
I think I wouldn't necessarily say it's stepping back, but maybe in addition to, as another objective that we can put onto the table and put into the report. I think it's an excellent suggestion and overdue as well. Rick,
I just wanted to comment on Stephen's point. And I think it's a really good one that whether this is focused mostly on addressing scientific questions, what are those scientific questions with regard to the Terciops stuff? Because as you said, they're a well-studied population, and so a lot of the questions that might be asked have been pretty well answered to this point. But forming a collaboration might present some opportunities for asking new questions. Are there other benefits to the PR side of it, etc.? So it seems like all that could be discussed at another venue or another opportunity. Maybe once a group of interested folks have been formed, carrying forward then and getting into the details of what would truly be the objectives, and then, as you said, kind of designing the concept or the approach to the website based upon some pretty well-defined goals ultimately that you'll come from it.
Okay, well, given my bias, there's a really well-established killer whale sighting network up in Puget Sound area, very well, and again, Orca network, which many of us contribute to. There just doesn't seem to be that consistent a sighting network in Southern California, and given that we get animals that come down from British Columbia and up from Mexico, and with the Eastern Tropical Pacific animals and populations that are endangered, small populations that like the LA pod that maybe go extinct with only like 13 to 15 animals. We don't know much about them. I think that's something that would be a good time to be setting some sort of a sighting network up for that, to see what's happening, because it's not just one population of killer whales, it's many different ones. And going through this area, particularly in California, particularly in Southern California, heavily contaminated water, industrialization. We've got a lot of animals coming up to boats, but the analysis is that these guys some of the populations, the reproduction is way down, and I could see a lot of them coming out of like a more developed sighting network for Southern California. And to California altogether, but particularly Southern California, has gotten a lot of sightings happening.
Any comments on that?
I was just going to give, in terms of sighting network up in our area, and maybe the reference to Orca Network and the difference that they made. We had a call-in your sightings of marine mammal hotline number at Cascadia, did the Whale Museum for years and years, and we'd get calls, and people's sightings would duly get noted and make it into some table and some footnote of something. And then Orca Network came up with the idea of basically, well, I'm sure that they didn't come up with it, but by now distributing sightings. Anytime you reported a sighting, it was distributed to everyone on a listserv and posted on a website. It was amazing how much that, and this gets to, I thought it tied into the question he was asking about credit to citizen scientists. And even though they may not want authorship, it is a huge incentive for people reporting sightings to see their name up in lights reporting whatever it is. I don't know how many people are reading it, but it gives them that credit for that sighting. And it was amazing for me to see how from an anonymous call-in, and you don't get much credit, to seeing your name up in lights, the explosion in sightings that created. And when you say about what would it take to build up a network down here, I think that's a mechanism that clearly helped promote that, is that people were excited to call in and email in sightings, knowing their sighting would now get posted up here. And I think that's what helped generate that sighting network and make it work so well in Puget Sound. And like having something similar for Southern California bite would be a way to promote it for multiple species, not just killer whales, all of them.
back to that.
Sorry. This was actually more in keeping with what John was saying earlier. I used to work at the Whale Museum, so I was getting those calls asking where all the whales are, and I know folks running OrcaNet. Something just to keep in mind, maybe on a larger scope, is that, especially if you're sharing information, by the way, John, I love that idea of crediting people with their observations, but you also have to protect the animals at the same time. I used to work in the whale watch industry. I was one of 200 boats, around 50 animals. So as you talk about collaboration, sharing information with the public, please keep in mind protecting the animals themselves. So if that's a 24-hour delay, and when you release the information, especially in an area like Puget Sound, and the same thing could happen down the Bight. You know, you don't want to put the animals at risk by helping people get excited about contributing this information. You know, you want to share the information, but not in a way that's going to get 50 boats out there on top of them. Because, like I said, I was the person who always fielded the questions: where are the whales, and why won't you tell me?
Thank you. That's a really important point. Yeah. I'm going to go to Michael, and then I think I'm going to cut it off. Let John, for those of you that want to stay a little bit into the break time, let John show us what he's got here from the website.
I just want to relate to what Greg George said, and also what Alicia asked about the bottlenose dolphin and bring it into gray whales, and put that response. If we all know what we're all doing in different ways, and we can, the people who are doing something in a certain area can talk to one another and define the needs that each one of us can do. If, say, all the bottlenose people decide that it is very beneficial to find out that there's an abundance of bottlenose dolphin regularly at some location. That seems like that could be beneficial information to help guide whatever else it's going to do. Similarly, with gray whales, if people are mapping certain corridors, then all of a sudden you create a bigger picture that works for the Navy that is doing that. And so the people who are working on specific projects, maybe somebody like Alicia her focus is gray whales, but she's seeing bottlenose. She can pay attention to the fact, okay, well, I can tell these bottlenose people that this is happening, and I can develop.
Yeah, thanks.
Can I ask one more real short thing, because I wanted to really quick to relate to her point on that.
Sure.
In a second. With killer whales, definitely, I think there is being a naturalist many years on the boats, that's a huge issue. I was on a sighting in which there were many boats. With gray whales, we actually have been contacting the skippers. When we have multiple sightings of gray whales going by, we let the skippers know, and that's actually reduced the amount of impact on an individual whale, because you don't have 4 or 5 boats in a fleet all following one whale. They're spread out on different whales, and I think that actually is a benefit to the animals. And knowing that someone's on shore and can see them seems to sort of keep some of these guys maybe a little in line.
Yeah, I think the thing is just strategize and think about how to convey the information in such a way that does make sure that the animals are as protected as possible.
Yeah, okay, with that, I'd like to thank the panel for their time and for being here and helping us to think through some of these questions. Tomorrow afternoon, there'll be a 30-minute wrap-up on this discussion that Bernardo has been taking notes, and he'll present that for us tomorrow. And that may be another time for us to make a few last comments. So thank you very much to everybody for being here and for your input. And for those of you that want to stay around and see what John's got going here with the Splash website, please do.
Basically, this site with the Splash database is set up to do a number of things, which includes allow input of photographs, comparison of photographs, but also access to the data. And I thought I'd take one quick feature, like for example, I've highlighted the Southern California Bight here, and if we select a specific area that we're interested in, say this Santa Monica Bay area here, we can box that out and actually just select what's in that animal, so now we've made that a filter. We could also filter even for specific sex of animals or anything like that. So there are a variety of filters or dates or years. I unfortunately think it's probably being modified as we speak. That's why my access isn't available right now, because I just unfortunately we do so
Maybe tomorrow.
Man, so I'll just say that basically you can box out an area like that, call up all the sightings for that area, get a display of sightings, select any individual, get the full history on that individual. You can select by sex because all the sample history and even the genetic results are in there for sex, not any kind of beyond that. That's genetics from Oregon State University that worked up sex on most of these animals. And so that's going to be a filter to be able to select for. So that's, we'll probably go live and what we're calling live with this by about the end of this month. So we're about 2 weeks away from where we'll be on the site. There'll be a link to it on our site. It's in development. If any of you have ever seen, there's an excellent website for whale sharks, and it was developed by a guy named Jason Holmberg, working with I think it's a Eco-Ocean group, and he's the one who developed this. So this is a variant on that whale shark database that again takes contributions. In the participant key is where you can enter and submit photographs, or you can screen photographs by type to match yourself. It still has, there's still a lot of work involved, but that's what I was going to try to review for you. But I think Jason's working on it right now because we gave him 2 or 3 additional changes he's making right now. So.
What is the geographic range?
The geographic range for Splash was the entire eastern North Pacific. Then we've updated, Splash was 2004 to 2006, and then it has all the West Coast data for U.S. West Coast, from Mexico to Canada, for all other years going back to 1986. Does not include Hawaii at present.
But, John, only because of procedural things, right? In other words, there's no filter in the database that would exclude a point on the ocean somewhere. I mean, if somebody had a catalog in Australia and wanted to dump it, it'll accept flat lawns in different places.
Right.
It's just the current participant list is for that reason.
Okay, thanks.